Good morning, everyone. On this wonderful sunny day, we're going to conclude the notes for our biology section on population genetics. And if you remember last time, we talked about organisms and how they have different growth patterns. They might have a J-shaped curve or an S-shaped curve. And also I told you that those were based on either biotic potential, which scientists use the letter R to indicate, or based on their environment's carrying capacity, which scientists use the letter K for. So today we're going to look at life strategies. And so organisms that experience those different growth curves will choose different ways to live their life. They have different strategies that they will use in order to survive in the environment. And so the very first life strategy we're going to look at is R-selected. Okay, so R-selected strategy belongs to organisms that choose to follow their biotic potential. They choose to sort of that carpe diem, seize the day. When the environment has the right conditions, they will reproduce like crazy, produce as many organisms as possible, because they know that those conditions might not last for very long, and therefore, only some of them might survive. But by producing a lot of organisms, they have a better chance that their population will continue. So when it comes to our selected species, these are organisms that are smaller in size. They have short lifespans. So we're looking at things like insects, for example. They produce large numbers of offspring, like I said, that seize the day. And then because of that, they have so many offspring, they provide little to no parental care whatsoever. Okay. Then we can have organisms that are K-selected. K-selected organisms, like the letter would indicate K, these organisms choose to follow their environment's carrying capacity. So they will have babies continuously during their lifespan, but they will, when conditions are good, they will have the babies, and then when conditions are not so good, then they won't. Okay, so they choose to follow their environment carrying capacity. And so when we compare these kinds of organisms, these ones are going to have a larger size. They're going to have a longer lifespan. Therefore, they can afford to not have babies all at once. They have late reproductive age, so it'll take them a little while longer to get to that reproductive age. That leg phase is going to be a little bit longer than it would in the S-shaped curve than it would in the J-shaped curve. And then, since they have small number of offspring, they can also provide care for them to ensure their survival. So here, I'd like for you guys to have an example. And so the example we're going to be using is a turtle. And the reason why I choose the turtle is because I don't want you to think of these categories R-selected and K-selected as absolutes. I want you to know that there's organisms that have certain characteristics that are R-selected and certain characteristics that are K-selected. So when we observe a turtle, as an amphibian, we're going to see that it's going to have some characteristics that are R-selected. It's not small in size compared to, let's say, a frog, okay? Short lifespan, no, they live quite a long time. Early reproductive age, they don't reproduce quite early, not as when they're little, they have to be quite a big size to reproduce. But they do produce large number of offspring. And they also give no parental care. Once they lay those eggs, they're out of there. And then it's up to the little hatchlings to make their way to the ocean. But we do have some K-selected characteristics of turtles. So they are large. They have a long lifespan. They have a late reproductive age. So you can see here that we can have characteristics of both. And that's usually what a diploma question would look like. They would give you an organism, and then they would say what characteristics in this organism are K and which ones are R. So it could be a numerical response, for example. Okay, so that's the thing. I don't want you to think about this as absolutes at all. Now, next, our next section that we're going to cover is going to be relationships in communities. And the reason why we cover relationships is because relationships can have an effect on growth. So relationships within communities affect growth. What kinds of relationships are we discussing here? You probably will have seen a lot of these either in junior high or in Bio 20, you would have seen these. So the first kind of relationship I want to talk about is competition. We know that fierce competition can decrease numbers. And we know that competition is due to something known as Gauss's principle. It's actually known as Gauss's principle of a competitive exclusion. And you might have heard about this in Bio 20. And you might have not referred to it as Gauss's principle. But what it states is that no two species or no two organisms can occupy the same niche without one of them being eliminated. And by being eliminated doesn't necessarily mean killed, but it could be that it has to move to another area, right? So if I nest in tree trunks and you nest in tree trunks and we are organisms of the same species, we're going to have competition. Also, if we're organisms of different species, we're going to have that competition because we both occupy the same niche. The niche could be I eat flies. If I eat flies and you eat flies, we're going to have a problem. That's where the competition is going to come about. Anytime that you have, a species of duck and another species of duck that can live in the same environment together, that must mean that they're not sharing a niche. They must be consuming different food. They must be using different space. They must be using different nesting sites. And that's where they can coexist. Anytime that you have two niches that overlap, you're going to have competition. Okay? So when it comes to competition, we can have two different kinds. We can have interspecific and intraspecific. So interspecific is between organisms of different species. Okay. So here, for example, I'm going to use a different color. Right here. Okay. So lions and hyenas competing for the same gazelle. Okay. So we have two different organisms wanting the same resource. And intraspecific, this is among the same species. And the reason why I like to use these terms is because I like to think of between, inter, there's an E there, and then among, there is intra over there. So the same species, if we're looking around the same species competition, okay, so, let's use turtles again. So turtles competing for nesting sites. All right. Or you could have two lions competing for the same mate. And in fact, when it comes to interspecific and intraspecific, the more brutal of the two, the one that usually ends up in death, is going to be the intraspecific, because you are competing for things like mates. When it comes to food, the hyena shows up, the lion's already there, the lion, does a show of strength, the hyena just walks away, right? But usually when it comes to mates, you're going to see two alpha males or an alpha male and a beta. going, against each other for that same female, right? So that's going to be the more brutal of the two. Now, when it comes to interspecific, one of the things that we worry about a lot of the times, especially in this day and age, is native versus invasive species. Okay, so for example, when you go to the airport, a lot of times they're asking you, are you bringing in any plants? Are you bringing in anything when you've traveled outside of the area? And the reason for that is we have a very delicate ecosystem of native species in our country. And if you were to bring in an invasive species, a species that is not native to the area, that could cause all sorts of issues. And I'll give you an example. When Australia was first colonized by the British, the koala population almost went extinct. And it was because the colonizers, the British, brought to Australia a foreign species that didn't exist there before. And I'll give you just a few seconds to guess what that was. I'm pretty sure you didn't guess that it was the house cat. Okay, they brought the house cat to Australia. It was not native to Australia. Cats are really good at climbing trees, and they were knocking the koalas that were half asleep from consuming eucalyptus. They were high from the eucalyptus. They were knocking them off the tree, and they almost went extinct because of that. So again, native versus invasive species is a very important topic to be aware of when you're looking at interspecific competition. Now, intraspecific competition, like I said, it can be really brutal, but it's mitigated by things like lifespan, by the fact that, youngsters are not competing for the same thing as the elders in their population. Think of a tadpole and a frog. They have very different requirements. So the tadpole does not have to compete with the grown frog. There's a hierarchy. I talked about an alpha male, right? So there's usually a hierarchy where the alpha male gets first pick of the females, and then the lower males in the hierarchy have to wait their turn. And then eventually those lower males might grow up and go against the alpha male and, surpass him or replace him as the alpha. And also, the reproductive age is different. So you're not going to have the youngsters that are not quite as strong as the adult males compete for one another. Okay, so that's competition. The other relationship is going to be predator, prey. You can also call it the producer-consumer relationship. Okay. Again, very delicate balance. These populations are related. So these population numbers are connected, very tightly connected to one another. And for that, I'm going to show you a graph. Okay. So here is a graph that shows the connection between the numbers of predators and prey. Okay, so you can see here the prey is in red, the predator is in blue. These are the population numbers, and this is time. And you can see that it usually starts with the prey, and the reason for that is the prey is the food source. And so we're going to have the prey that increases in numbers, and so the food source becomes abundant. Because of that, the predator numbers can also grow. But as the predator numbers grow, those prey numbers are now going to be decreasing because the predators are eating the prey. As the prey numbers decrease, predators have no food. So now, as you can see, the predator numbers are decreasing. As the predator's number decrease, the prey can recover in numbers, and same within the predator. So as you can see, the predator population lags behind the prey because the prey is the food source. Okay. So the predator numbers lag behind the prey numbers because the prey is the food source. Okay. Now, not only are these two populations related in numbers, they're also related in their evolution. So these populations are also connected in their evolution. You see, as the predator gets better at catching the prey has to get better at avoiding predation. So it's going to develop all of these different adaptations to escape its predators. And then as it's getting better at escaping predators, the predators have to get better at catching the prey. It's a survival thing. And so they have to evolve together. Okay. So they co-evolve. As the prey gets better at escaping, the predator gets better at catching. Okay, so there is a number of defenses against predation. We can't talk about all of them. I'll give you just a few examples of what these defenses might be. And so we can start off with chemical defense. Okay, so different examples of chemical defenses. You can have things like poison. Okay, some snakes have poison for them. Same with bees. There's a reason why they have that. It's for a defense. They're not trying to be jerks about it. It's just that's their defense mechanism. Okay, the bitter taste. There is a species of butterfly known as the monarch butterfly that makes birds extremely ill if they consume it. So it's that bitter taste and that toxic sort of substance. A smell. You know, we've seen skunks, for example. Or ink. Probably remember this scene from Finding Nemo, where the little squid releases ink and it says, "Oh, you guys made me ink." Okay, so that is also a defense against predator. The inking from the squid causes the predator to become disoriented, and therefore the prey has a chance to escape. The second kind is known as trickery. And trickery can come into many forms. You can have noise. So for example, the rattlesnake that shakes its tail to sort of give you that warning that it's dangerous to stay away. Okay. You can have changing body shape, like an armadillo, for example, that can roll itself into a ball. You can have leaving parts behind. Okay. So like the gecko that will drop its tail and run in the opposite direction. It can trick the predator into going into a different direction. Or I'm going to show you a quick clip of a video of another kind of trickery.
You're about to witness one of the most bizarre pieces of defensive weaponry ever devised by Mother Nature. Has there ever been a weirder use of an eye socket? Or of blood? This bloody lizard lives near saguaro trees in the Sonoran Desert in Mexico. A bird drops saguaro fruit for the harvester ants to munch on. And in turn, the regal horned lizard munches on the ants. The ants make it their business to fight back, looking for a chink in the lizard's body armor. Unfortunately for the ants, the regal horned lizard has a sticky tongue with pretty good aim, and it's immune to ant venom. And its body can actually get all the moisture it needs from the ants, which make up 90% of its diet. Just as the ants are stalked by the lizard is stalked by a coyote, the next link on the food chain. The coyote is fast, deft, and determined. The lizard finally has a reason to deploy its doomsday weapon. That swelling below the lizard's eye isn't a tear duct. It's high-octane coyote repellent, aka blood. Let her rip. Blood pressure builds up to the point where the lizard can actually shoot blood out of its eye with the precision aim of a sharpshooter. And yes, it's nothing more than plain old blood. The coyote wisely retreats to find a less feisty meal. Game, set, match. Victory to the blood-squirting regal horned lizard.
So that's trickery right there. And the next one, mimicry. Okay, so out of all of the defense mechanism, the next two are the most important. So I'm going to star these two. So mimicry. Mimicry is when an organism called a mimic is going to copy or resemble another harmful organism called the model. Okay? And it doesn't necessarily have to be harmful, but in this case, if you are defenseless, you want to mimic something that is going to be scary or something that is a little bit more apt at avoiding predators than you. And so for that, I'm going to give you the example of, it is a caterpillar, but it has a swollen tail that what it does is it looks like the face of a snake. Now the caterpillar has no idea that that's what it looks like. It has no idea why predators are not attacking it. What it does is it passes on that characteristic to its offspring. Okay, so there was a mutation that caused this caterpillar to have 2 dots at the back on its bum, and birds were leaving it alone. And then it started to pass that characteristic on to its offspring, and that's how you got this characteristic. But like I said, the caterpillar is not aware that it looks like a snake, okay? But that's what it looks like. So that's the mimic and the model. So that was C. D is camouflage. Okay. In camouflage, again, you have an organism, but this time the organism doesn't resemble another organism. It resembles the environment. Now, when we're talking about mimicry here, the one thing that I left out that I should probably mention, it doesn't just have to do with appearances. So this can be in appearance or behavior. Earlier I mentioned that you have the rattlesnake that will shake the tail to let predators know that it's dangerous. There is a species of baby owls that also will mimic that sound. And so that when they're sitting in their nest, they sound like a rattlesnake and the predator will stay away. So it can be in appearance or behavior. So camouflage, this is the organism that hides in its environment. Whoops, wrong picture. This is the one I want. That's the one I was going to show you. And you can see how easily this frog will blend into the tree trunk of this tree so that you can't really spot it, especially if the eyes are closed, you can't really spot it as a predator, okay? So that's predator-prey relationship. And our next relationship, I was using blue and I was at B, so we're going to be at C. So here what we're going to have is symbiosis. So symbiosis are relationships that develop between organisms that are closely together, okay, in close proximity, and that's what it means. Symbio means close, and biosis means living, okay? So relationship or relationships that develop between organisms found in close proximity. So because they live so closely together in their environment, they develop a relationship. And there is 3 different kinds of relationships that you can have. There's mutualism, there's commensalism, and there is parasitism. Now, mutualism, the way that to understand these relationships is mutualism is what I call a plus-plus relationship or a win-win. Both organisms are going to benefit from their relationship. So when I think of mutualism, for example, this is a good one. So you can see here you have an alligator and a bird. So the bird is going to be sort of the alligator's dentist. It's going to clean out all of the different little chunks that are stuck in the alligator teeth, and it's going to feed itself in that way. And the alligator is going to get its teeth cleaned. And since alligators only have one set of teeth, they're not like sharks that lose their teeth and they have another row growing behind. They're very reliant on those teeth for their survival. And so they are going to be relying on these birds to keep those teeth clean. There have been studies where alligators that have been part of a drought have not eaten for months and months and months, and they will not dare to eat one of these birds because their relationship is so tight that if the birds stop cleaning their teeth, those alligators could die. So they'd rather die of starvation than kill the birds that are in their mouth. Parasitic relationship is easy as well because parasitism is a plus-minus relationship. One benefits and one suffers. So parasitism, when I think of parasitism, an easy one is aphids on a leaf. Okay, so these organisms are feeding on the xylem and phloem of these leaves, and they're going to kill the plant. The plant gets nothing out of this relationship. If anything, it suffers. Now, it's not the intention of the parasite to kill the host, right? So this is going to be the parasite, and the leaf is the host. That's not their intention. They're trying to get food out of them, but eventually what can happen is the parasite will kill the host. And then the last relationship is commensalism, which is very, very rare in nature, but it is a +0 relationship. So what you have is you have one organism benefits and the other one gets nothing out of the relationship whatsoever. Okay, and the example we usually use here is the relationship between a caribou and an Arctic fox. So you can see here you have a very large ungulate like the caribou being followed around by Arctic fox. Now the Arctic fox is way too small to kill the caribou, and so scientists for the longest time they were trying to figure out why is this fox following the caribou around. Now because of the caribou large hooves, when it's going through the snow, it's lifting the snow up, and that can reveal small insects or small rodents for the Arctic fox to consume. So the Arctic fox benefits from following the caribou around, and the caribou doesn't care since it doesn't give it any sort of threat. But lately, what the research has pointed out is that the relationship between the two might actually be mutualistic, in the sense that the caribou might get some sort of benefit from the Arctic fox as a pet. And the reason that they're starting to think that is when they're following these populations around, they've noticed that if an Arctic fox gets stuck somewhere, the caribou actually stops and waits. So what reason would the caribou have to stop and wait for the Arctic fox if they don't care whether they're around or not? So they think that it might be sort of a emotional relationship, that the caribou gets attached to the fox, and therefore they'll wait if the fox gets stuck. So, that's sort of what they're thinking, that it might not be as commensalistic as we think. It might be more mutualistic of a relationship. Okay? So these are the 4 different kinds of relationships that you can have in an environment, and you can see how they can increase or decrease the population, if they benefit or not the relationship. And so then in the last section that we need to cover in this unit is changes within a community. So not only populations can change, but also communities. And the way that communities change over time in an environment has a term. It's called succession. So succession is the pattern of invasion and replacement of species, that occurs over time in a community. Okay. And there are two kinds of succession: primary and secondary succession. And they're going to progress in the same way, but they occur for different reasons, and they're going to have a different timeline. So primary succession occurs where there was no community before. So this terrain is completely bare. The example here would be when a glacier retreats. As a glacier retreats, what you have is solid rock that is exposed. And therefore, there was no soil, there was no community that lived in that area before. Another one, it could be a lava flow. When you have an area that is covered by lava, again, you've removed all the soil, you've removed all of the community. What you have is bare rock. So that's going to be primary succession. Secondary succession, on the other hand, occurs where there was a community before. So there was a disruption to an existing community. So let's say that I have a forest, and that forest had trees, had animals, had everything that lived in it, and then there was a fire or a flood. Now the trees might be gone, the organisms might be gone, but the soil is still there. The roots are there. The seeds that the trees might have dropped are there. Okay, so there you had a community before, there was a soil present. So when it comes to these two, this one is going to be taking much longer. Whereas this one will develop in a much shorter period of time because I had the soil, right? So the progression of these two is going to be the same. So I'm going to say longer because no soil present, and shorter because soil already there. So the progression is going to be the same for these two. It is always, so they proceed the same way. There's always going to be a beginner species. That's going to be called as the pioneer species. It's going to be the first one in the area. It's a hardy species that can sustain, winds and sun and maybe very little water. And so it's something that it can grow in these harsh environments, like a forest that has been just devastated by fire, okay? And then you're going to have a series of seral stages, a replacement of this pioneer species by a different species. So I might start with lichen on rock, and then that lichen is going to be replaced by grass, and then grass is going to be replaced by shrubs, and then shrubs might have deciduous trees, and then deciduous trees are going to be replaced by conifers, depending on which area I'm finding myself. But these are the stages of change. Those seral stages are the stages of change. And then finally, what I end up with is something called a climax species. This is a species that is stable, it has a stronghold on the environment, and it's not going to be changing. And scientists have gotten pretty good, depending on the area where this succession occurred. They can tell you exactly what plant you can expect next, what organism you can expect next to move into the area. Okay, so this takes us to the end of our population unit. We saw how Populations are not static, they are dynamic, they change over time. Through population dynamics, we explored how they grow and their density and how they're distributed. Then we saw that there are factors that are going to affect that growth. And we saw that relationships in communities are one of those factors, and that communities do change as well, not just species or organisms. Okay, together with this video, I will be posting as well your assignment. And then that's it for the rest of the week. You guys have until next Wednesday for the assignment, and I will see you tomorrow for our Google Meet. Bye.